and the taher meaning it's pure night. And that's the point where they're allowed to eat Tumah. But taher doesn't mean that the day that the person becomes pure. It means the day is pure, meaning the night is pure. There's no day. It's pure night. Okay, and in that case, we learn that we're allowed to go to that we're allowed to eat Tumah on the seventh day. But there's a different pirush, meaning that the person needs to actively become pure by giving his korbanot sacrifice, and therefore he's allowed to eat the Tumah only the day after, on the 8th day. So the conclusion of the Gemara in Daf Bet Amud Bet is, let's see, Bet Amud Bet, three lines from the top, 2 lines from the top. Amar Rava bar Rav Shila, im ken lema kra v'yitaher, mai v'taher, taher yoma, kedam re'in she'erav shimsha v'dach yoma. So the Gemara says that we have to say that Bubash Mish v'taher, it's not talking about the person, but talking about the day. Talking about the person, I know talking about the day. Oh, there's something wrong with the Zoom again. So the person needs to in the 7th day he's allowed to become pure, and he's allowed to give he's allowed to eat Tumah at the evening. So although only the day after he becomes the atonement, he completes the process only the day after. Right? That's what he says. He completes the process the day after, but yet he says that it doesn't hold him back. That kapara doesn't hold him back. He's allowed to eat Tumah. So that's where we stopped yesterday. Let's continue. The Marava in the west, that's in Eretz Israel. They didn't hear what Rabba Bar Shila said. Okay, now it's working? Okay. If you have to go downstairs. So they didn't hear what Rabba Bar Shila was saying. So Rabba Bar Shila was teaching us a very important halakha. He was teaching us that Uba Hashem is v'taher. What does it mean Uba Hashem is v'taher? That he's allowed to eat Tumah on the 7th day. Right? And what is Biyat Shemesh? Biyat Shemesh as
being medayek from the word but it
doesn't say it says Vita.
Vayita means it's future, means he has to do it in the future. Vayitaher means he does it in the past, so therefore
Vayitaher it means that he needs to actively do something. That's meaning Vayitaher. He needs to do something.
Vayitar is future tense.
What?
Vayitar. Lemakra Vayitar. I should have said Vayitar, and he will become pure.
No. Vitaher.
means yeah.
No, past. No, future. Vitaher, the future.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, Vitaher means in the future, but Vitaher means it's an.
Vitaher automatically happens.
So.
Happens automatically, without doing anything. So if the meaning here was that he needs that only on the 8th day, and by being korban, only then he becomes tahor, and only then he's allowed to eat Tumah, then you have to say Vitaher. He needs to do something. It doesn't say that. It says Vitaher. So therefore we learn that on the 7th day he becomes tahor. But all this chidush, the Gemara says, B'ma'arava in Eretz Yisrael didn't hear that. The Gemara says, B'ma'arava in Eretz Yisrael, in the west, had the Rabba bar Rav Shila, lo shomi ale, didn't hear about this chidush. And therefore they had this doubt, they had this safek. And what was the safek? The safek was as follows. Hai uba shemesh biyad shimshohu, umay v'te'er ter yoma, odima biyad orohu, umay v'te'er ter gavra. So again, the question that they had, as we mentioned before, is what's the meaning Uba Shemesh V'Taher, that the sun arrived, the sun came, and it became something became pure. So what is it? Or we're talking about the day, and V'Taher means that the night became pure, that there's no night anymore, there's no day anymore, and in that case he's allowed to eat Tumah the 7th day, or V'Taher Ter Gavra, or V'Taher is referring to the person. That he needs to do something. He needs to become pure by bringing korbanot, by bringing sacrifices. So the Gemara says, so they learned, they got to the conclusion, they resolved this question by the Braita. I mean, the Ketan Braita, Siman Adavar, Tzedok Kochavim, Shma Mina Biyad Shimsho, Uma V'Te'er Torah Yoma. So Gemara later on will say that it's time that they can the night, the night is when Tzedek Chavim starts. So there's no clear proof that that's the time, but there's indication. There's indication later on. The Gemara will say that we learn that Tzedek Chavim, it's the time where it becomes pure. The day becomes. That's referring to the day and not referring to the night. So we don't. So later on, we're not really going to prove that the time it's Tzedek Chavim, that you're allowed to eat at Tzedek Chavim, but there's an indication here that that's the time. Over there it says, "ממתי מתחילים לקרוא קריאת שמע בערבית, משעה שהכהנים זכאים לאכול בתרומתם, סימן הדבר צדק כוכבים." So over there it clearly says when is the time of Kohen to eat Tumah. It says when the Kohanim go inside they eat Tumah. When the Kohanim, when is the time to eat Kriyat Shema? When the Kohanim are allowed to eat Tumah. And when is that? Tzedek Kochavim. So it clearly says Tzedek Kochavim. So we have to say that Uba Hashem B'Ta'er is at that night and not the day after. Because it clearly says it's Tzedek Kochavim. So now the Gemara will get to the main Braita. Amar Mor, Mishah שהכהנים נכנסים לאכול בתרומתם. I'm quoting from the Mishnah. When is a person allowed to? When is the obligation start? The obligation of reading Kriyat Shema. When does it start? Mishah שהכהנים נכנסים לאכול בתרומתם. When the Kohanim are entering, as we mentioned yesterday, the Kohanim are coming from outside the city. That's why it says Nichnasim. Yeah? Where are the Nichnasim? The Nichnasim from outside. They come from outside. They go to the mikveh. They come from outside, from the outside. So in those days, all the mikvahot were outside the city. The Gemara brings different opinions. We're going to bring the Braita, but different opinions when exactly is that moment of giving a person of eating tuma. Uminu, ממתי קוראים את שמע בערבין? משעני נכנס לאכול פת במלח עד שעה שעומד להיפטר מתוך סודתו. So the Gemara brings a different Braita that says that when is the right time to start reading Kriyat Shema? This is when a poor person. And why are we talking about a poor person? Because he doesn't have candles. He doesn't have candles. He can't afford to buy candles. So he needs to eat this meal early, so to speak. So at the time where he's eating bread with salt, and his meal goes for until he is leaving his meal. Okay. So very short, it also says if that's the time where the Kohanim is eating that's the time that you need to eat Kriyat Shema. So how can this poor person eat a meal when he needs to read Kriyat Shema? If your sign of reading Kriyat Shema is when this poor person is eating his bread, so how can you say that that's the time we should read Kriyat Shema? This poor person is not allowed to eat is not allowed to eat bread. So the Tosfot says it's shortly before that time. That's this answer. Anyway, the Gemara says Sefer.
Somebody's preparing the food for him.
What?
Someone is preparing the food for him, so therefore, since someone's preparing the food, he has a few minutes.
No, Tosfot says Elapurta mikar kama. That's the answer. Elapurta mikar kama. שעד שיכינו לו סעודתו יקרא ויתפלל.
עד שיכינו לו סעודתו.
Yeah.
Somebody's preparing him, so
yeah,
while someone's preparing him, he's able to recite the Kriyat Shema.
Right. So no, but he himself also can do it. The thing is that it's not at that moment. It's slightly before. It's not
that when he's that's also why.
עד שאני נכנס לאכול, yeah.
So Nicholas, but he didn't start doing it. It could be he came in from work or something. Now he's going to go eat, but beforehand he'll say Kriyat Shema.
Yeah, so at that moment, so what I was saying is just what is saying that people will organize his meal, and that moment, that shortly before this time, he's eating, he's reading Kriyat Shema. Yeah. Okay. The Gemara says Sefer Vadai Pliga Matiti. Resha Milema Pliga Matiti. So it's very clear that the Sefer, the end of this Braita that says that Ad Shah Shomed Lipatem Mitoch Sudato, meaning when he ends his meal, of course he's very strict. Nobody, even Rabbi Eliezer, that says until the first, until the end of the first watch, he doesn't even follow him. He says it's a very short time. How long does it take a person to eat a meal? It takes him 10 minutes, 20 minutes, right? So it's very clear that the Sefer doesn't agree with, and there's no opinion that can compare to this opinion. It's a new opinion here. It's a new opinion that says that you end the Suda. You're not allowed to eat Kriyat Shema after this poor person ends the Suda. But can we argue and say that the first part of this Braita that says that when the Ani is going inside and eating his bread, can we say that this is the same time where the Kohanim are eating Teruma, or perhaps it's not the same time? That's the question. Milema pliga matitin. Or we forced to say, or we forced to say that Misha'asha Kohanim nechasim lechol b'turmatan, and the poor person eating his bread with salt. Or we forced to say that it's those two different times, or not two different times. The Gemara says, Lo. We can say that the poor person eating his bread and the Kohen, they're both the same time. Okay? That's what the Gemara says. Why do you have to say that it's two different times? No, it's the same time. Okay, there's no contradiction. The Gemara says, V'ominu. So the Gemara wants to challenge this statement. So have in mind now, we should all have in mind that Ani ochel bepito and Kohanim nechasim lechol b'turmatam, they are both the same time. Right? Gemara wants to challenge this conclusion. What is Uminu? We have a question. When is the time to read Kriyat Shema at the evening? When people are going inside on Friday night, and that's earlier than the weekdays because for usually on Friday night everything is prepared. On the weekdays you have to prepare the food. So it takes time. But on Friday night, your wife is preparing all the food, somebody else is preparing your food for you, so it's earlier than the weekdays. So Rabbi Meir says the time where the time where you should read Kriyat Shema, it's when people are going inside to eat the bread on Friday night, particularly on Friday night. Rabbi Meir. Chachayim omrim, בשעה שהכהנים זכאים לאכול בתרומתם. סימן לדבר, צדק כוכבים. Chachamim are saying no. The time is when the Kohanim are entitled or allowed to eat Tuma, and as we know, it's Tzedek Kochavim, when feast has appeared, that's the time that the Kohanim, that you're allowed to eat Kriyat Shema, because that's the time where the Kohanim are allowed to eat Tuma. Siman Adavar, the Gemara says there's a sign, a very clear sign to this opinion. Tzedek Kochavim. Gemara says the time that the Kohanim are eating, that the time where the Kohanim are eating Tumah, it's the Kochavim. Okay, although there's no clear proof to say that this is from the scriptures, from the pasuk, that's the time where they can read Kriyat Shema, but there is a sign. There's a sign that we learn from the Navi. What's the sign? זכר דלה שנאמר, ואנחנו עושים במלאכה וחציה מחזיקים ברמחים מעלות השחר עד צדוק כוכבים. והוא אומר, והיו לנו לילה למשמר והיום מלאכה. So it says over there that those people, when they're working, we are working, while we are working, we're occupied with labor, working. וחציה מחזיקים ברמחים, and half of them are holding the spears. מעלות השחר עד צדוק כוכבים, from מעלות השחר up till צדוק כוכבים. So you see that they are working up till Tzedek Kochavim. Tzedek Kochavim, it's night. You don't work at night anymore. Okay? So that's time. That's night time. Another proof, another pasuk, it says, at night we are guarding, we are protecting the people. And during the day we are working. So there's kind of two proofs, two psukim, two verses to support, to teach us that the day ends at Tzedek Kochavim. But the question that we have is, what's the point of adding another pasuk? Why are we not satisfied with the first pasuk? It's very clear that the night starts at Tzedek Kochavim, and that's why we should read Kriyat Shema. It's the night when you go to sleep. Tzedek Kochavim. So why do we have to add another pasuk? What's the point of teaching me or giving another pasuk? The Gemara says, the answer is, v'chitema mechir arba shimsha laylahu, v'inu demechashchem v'kadme, tashema v'ayu lanu alayla mishmar v'ayu melacha. The Gemara says that the reason why we are bringing the second pasuk because we could come up to our mind to say that that those people will wake up early in the morning and will continue working even after Tzedek Kochavim, even after Shkia. So we can argue and say that Shkiat HaChama, that's where night starts, and that's where you have to start and read Kriyat Shema. And if you're going to ask me, 1 second, the pasuk said Tzedek Kochavim, no, they were extra, they were working a bit more, overtime, okay? But we can argue and say that Shkiat HaChama, that's night, and that's where you need to add Kriyat Shema. And therefore we need a second pasuk to say, to teach us that The night is when they are guarding, and the day is when they're working. Okay? And from here we learn that the day ends at Tzedek Kochavim. We call it a day, right? After Tzedek Kochavim, we call it a day. Okay, and that's why we need two psukim. Because with the first pasuk, we could argue and say those people are very diligent, very hardworking. They like to wake up early in the morning, and they like to work until after night, after Shkan. And we can argue and say that sunset, that's night. And that's when you need to read Kriyat Shema. Therefore, the second pasuk says, "Vayu lanu halayla mishma vayom elecha." No, Hayom elecha is until Tzedek Kochavim, because the first pasuk says Tzedek Kochavim, right? So and that's all considered Yom. It says clearly Yom. The day is that's the day. Anyway, that's more or less to explain the Braita. But now let's get to the question. The question: what's the point of bringing all this Braita? We have a question here. Ma says Kasag datach dani ubnei adam chachurau. So we are initially assuming that ani, when the poor person is going eating his bread, and bnei adam, because the Braita, this Braita says, what does this Braita say? B'shah shebnei adam nechasim lechol pitam be'arvei Shabbatot, right? So we assume that when people are eating their bread on Friday night, and when the poor person is eating bread, they are both the same time. That's what we want to say. There's no proof for that, but that's what we don't want to create too many opinions. So we initially assume that those times of a poor person eating his bread and other people going inside eating the bread on Friday night, it's both the same time. Chad shurau, it's one shiur, one time. Ma says v'yamad ani v'kohen chad shurau chachamim enu Rabbi Meir. So Ma says, now if you say that ani v'kohen, now because at the beginning we said that ani v'kohen, it's one shiur, one time, right? We said the ani is eating his bread and the kohen is the one time. So it's both one. It's not. There's no difference between this time. So if that's the case, Chachamim and Rabbi Meir. If that's the case, Chachamim and Rabbi Meir are both saying the same thing, right? Yeah. So they're both saying the same thing. So if that's the case, there's no argument.
So we can't say that.
So we cannot say exactly. So we cannot say that ani and kohen it's the same time. Like that's what the Gemara says. We cannot say that the ani and the kohen is the same time. It's not the same time. There's two different times. Okay? Because if it's the same time, then there's no argument in this Braita between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim. Because we assume that ani, the poor person eating his bread, and other people are eating other bread, it's both the same time. So if it's both the same time, so it's like the Kohen. And if it's like the Kohen, so there's no argument here between Chachamim and Rabbi Meir. It says, therefore we come to the conclusion that the poor person is one time, and the Kohen is a different time. Okay? So we have to say that. The Gemara says, "Lo, ani v'kohen chad shurau, ani u'bnei adam lo chad shurau." The Gemara says, "No, we're not forced to say that. We don't have to say that. We can still say that ani, the poor person, and the kohen, it's one shiur. But the poor person and other people eating his bread, that's not the same time. Because how did we get to this problem? We got to this problem because we said the poor person and the other people the same time. If at the same time, then there's no difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Chachamim. And it looks like there is a difference between them because they're arguing. So we have to, so Gemara says, you know what? I will argue and say that ani and the Kohen is one time, it's one shiur, one measurement. And a poor person and other people going inside eating the bread, that's not the same time. There's different times. But the Gemara says, one second, we can still challenge it. I still want to argue and say that ani, the poor person, and the Kohen, it's one shiur. Now the Gemara brings a third Braita that brings different opinions, and from this Braita we learn that the ani and Kohen, it's not the same time, right? They're two different times. And how do you learn that? The Gemara will bring 4 opinions about when exactly to read Kriyat Shema. When is the time that we can start reading Kriyat Shema? And if we will say that ani and Kohen is the same time, then this Braita will not make sense. So let's read it. The Gemara says, when is the time to read Kriyat Shema at Arvit? The first opinion is It's when we sanctify the day on Friday night. And when is that? Twilight. Right? After sunset, we're not allowed to work anymore. It's twilight. What is twilight? Safek Yom Safek Laila. Okay? So at that point, it's where you have to read Kriyat Shema. So that's it's prior to Tzedek Kochavim. It's not Tzedek Kochavim, it's before Tzedek Kochavim. That's the Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Mishah Kohanim Mitoarim Lechol B'Trumatam. Rabbi Yeshua says no. The time is when the Kohanim are allowed to eat Truma, and that's Tzedek Kochavim. When there's three stars appear. Rabbi Meir Omer, Mishah Kohanim Tolim Lechol B'Trumatam. Rabbi Meir says no. It's when the Kohanim are going to the mikveh. Okay? And that's before twilight. Right? Because the Kohanim need to purify themselves by the mikveh on the 7th day when they become impure. They have to go to a mikveh on the 7th day, and he says, Rabbi Meir, it has to be before twilight. So you're allowed to eat Kriyat Shema during the day. That's fascinating. That's an interesting opinion. And that's why the Braita is challenging this opinion. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, how can you say that? As we know, the Kohanim are going to the mikveh during the day. So how can you say that the person can read Kriyat Shema during the day? That's when they go to sleep. It's not during the day. But the Gemara will answer this question later on. Anyway, the fourth opinion is Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina Omer, Mishah she'ani nichnas lechol pito b'melach. Rabbi Chanina says it's the moment where the ani, the poor person, is going inside and eating his bread with salt. Rabbi Ahaim v'amar Rabbi Acha. Rabbi Acha, and some say it's Rabbi Acha, says, Mishah sherov b'nei adam nichnasim le'asev. When majority of people, when most people are going inside to recline. Okay? And that's very late. Ma says, and if you argue, I want to say that the poor person and the Kohen eating his Tumah, they're both the same time, meaning Tzedek Kochavim, so Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yeshua. So there's no argument here between Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yeshua. And it appears from the Braita that there is an argument, because Rabbi Chanina says, what does Rabbi Chanina say? Rabbi Chanina says, B'sha'ah she'ani neches lechol pito b'tumah, right? And what is Rabbi Yeshua saying? Rabbi Yeshua says, it's Mishah she'kohanim mitoarim lechol b'tumah. It's when the Kohanim are eating the Tumah, Tzedek Kochavim. And you're saying it's both the same time. You cannot say it's both the same time because they're arguing. Each one is giving a different example, and it shows that those different examples are different times. Because if at the same time, they're not arguing. Why should they argue if at the same time? Just giving examples. Gemara says, no, Shema min, ela Shema mina, shura danich lichud, v'shura dekohen lichud Shema mina. The conclusion of the Gemara is no, that the ani and the Kohen are two different times. The ani is a different time, and the Kohen is a different time. And B'ezras Hashem tomorrow we will learn when exactly is the time of the ani, and when exactly the time is the Kohen. But the conclusion of this page, and that's what we have to have in mind right so far, is that a poor person eating his bread with salt is a different time than the Kohen, than when the Kohen is going inside and eating his Tumah. And B'ezras Hashem tomorrow we'll learn when exactly this time, when exactly the poor person is eating his bread, and when the Kohen is eating the Kohen, we know already when the Kohen is eating too much, the Kochavim, but the poor person eating his bread, that's the Gemara will discuss B'ezras Hashem later on, and we'll learn it tomorrow. Amen.